Every leader has their own style and their own way of leading. And our guest today is Cathy Engelbert. She's the commissioner of the Women's National Basketball Association, the WNBA, and she leads with an insightful, competitive, and down to earth manner that makes her a true trailblazer. Cathy, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation.
David, it's great to be here today.
Cathy, I can't wait to get to your amazing business career. But first, I understand you have a lot of basketball in your DNA. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of 8 kids with 5 brothers, but my father was actually drafted into the NBA for, at the time, the Fort Wayne Pistons, but Detroit Pistons in 1957. So he was very accomplished college basketball player under Dr. Jack Ramsey, who went on to be a Naismith Hall of Famer and NBA champion with Portland. And so, yeah, little DNA with my father, who was 6'6", and then there was 8 of us, and I had 3 older brothers, and I was always thrown in the backyard on lots of sports and certainly basketball. We had like a little makeshift, wooden backboard that was always decrepit, but somehow we were out there playing all the time. So, and then I went on to play at a Division I level for now Naismith Hall of Fame coach Muffet McGraw, who just retired from Notre Dame, but I played with her in her first head coaching job at Little Lehigh University, but very was such a great upbringing for me to be part of a sports family.
5 brothers now, and a family of 8. What was it like to have those 5 brothers? I know they taught you a lot about sports and you got to compete, but what was that like?
Yeah, it was competitive. We played everything, and I had 3 of them were older, and we were all in a line, a year apart from each other, and I was always their fourth in the backyard playing wiffle ball and street hockey. They would put me in goal, and certainly basketball and soccer and every sport you can imagine. So it was a very competitive upbringing, lots of sibling rivalry. We competed for everything, from cereal to the parents' time, to everything. So it was really a fun upbringing, but, hard because my father had to work 3 jobs. My mom didn't have the opportunity to go to college in the 50s. And so, she stayed at home, although she worked for a doctor's office and actually just retired after 62 years there.
Wow, congrats. That's amazing.
Yeah, and my father unfortunately passed away when I was quite young. I had just graduated from college, and so I was kind of the oldest one home when he died, and had a younger brother who was only 12, 13. So yeah, but my father worked these 3 jobs to put all 8 of us through college, and he didn't get to be here to see the 8th, but yeah.
How do you think that humble background beginning has really shaped you as a leader?
Yeah, there's no doubt it shaped me to be competitive for sure. It shaped me to be collegial, and literally we had to do everything together. We had to work together. We all did chores. We had our assigned chores. And so we had to work together. And I think it really, I didn't think of it until I became the CEO of Deloitte, but those early days in your life really shape your leadership style. And then having played 3 sports in high school, 2 in college, shaped it even further because you started to become a leader on the court or the field. And I also played lacrosse in college, I think that upbringing with a lot of siblings and always something to do, and before technology and the internet were invented, really set me on a path to then join a very male-dominated world that I joined in 1986 when I graduated in the accounting and consulting profession. And I think it just took off from there as far as, taking that competitor attitude, but also knowing that my mom used to say this to me. She used to say, Cathy, you're going to do fine because, you're entering a male dominated world, but you're growing up with 5 of them. So you're going to do just fine. And she gave me that confidence.
Well, you mentioned you played a couple of sports at Lehigh, and you didn't not only play, you're the captain of both the lacrosse and the basketball team. What did you learn about leadership, by being the captain of the team? What did that teach you? Can you tell us a story?
Yeah, so first, when I first got to Lehigh, I was a walk-on for the basketball team. I actually was recruited for lacrosse, so I walked onto the basketball team my freshman year, and by sophomore year was the starting point guard. And a point guard it's very interesting if you go back and study positioning in sports too, and captains, and how many times they're not the high scorer. And I wasn't, but I reveled in an assist and a great pass or a good look. And so, that I learned to find my place on the team, to lead the team, and to feed the stars, because I knew I wasn't necessarily the fastest player, I wasn't the biggest player, but I could use the talents of everyone around me. And that is such a great lesson for leaders today: is the leader can't be everything. A CEO can't be everything, but you have to surround yourself with the best talent that brings that team together and works at a team and recognizes as a team. So that's definitely what I learned on the court and field at Lehigh, no doubt about it, and being a captain, quite frankly, my senior year.
That's great. And you mentioned that you played for Hall of Fame coach Muffet McGraw. What did she teach you about coaching and how to do it really well?
Well, Muffet is very competitive. She's very focused. This was her first head coaching job, and I think Lehigh had like 4 or 5 wins when she came, before the year before she came. And she came in my freshman year. She didn't recruit any of us because she kind of got named in August, and that's when we started. But she definitely turned us around. We were 24-4 my senior year. Really had a lot of success. So she taught us, like, you can come from a program that was a bit in shambles, and with hard work and dedication and focus, and she was a competitor and she hated to lose, and you didn't want to disappoint her. So you wanted to really, she was definitely someone you wanted to follow at the time, and you wanted to succeed for her because she put her whole heart and soul into it. And I think she continued that when she left Lehigh at Notre Dame and led them to 2 national championships.
What you mentioned, you didn't want to disappoint her. What is it about a leader? What's a leader have to do so that their people really feel that way about them?
Yeah, and I think, David, better than anyone, leading is about setting the vision, and empowering your people to execute. And I think that's what it was all about. Like, her vision was, we were going to win. We were going to win our conference. We were going to get an NCAA tournament bid. And she set that vision. And I'm not sure I would have framed it that way back when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. But today it's like, okay, now we all want to get that done. We want to succeed because she set that vision in us, and then she prepared us. And she used to say, I used to love this. She used to say, like, the game is won in practice. Practice as hard as you play in a game. And that's another thing in business. Yeah, the game is not won like when one thing's on the line. It's won in all the preparation leading up to closing a big deal or driving a big new revenue stream. And so those are kind of the lessons I now think. Again, would never frame them back when I was 20 years old, but I definitely think that led to some of my kind of leadership later on in life.
When you think about it, Cathy, what's a one-on-one coaching session like with you?
Well, first, I'm a driver for sure. So, I think because of my long business career, I joined sports, and I don't think they're used to someone who wants to come in and really transform and develop them in their career, and give them, I know you preach a lot about recognition, and recognize them, because I was at the point, like, I don't need the recognition. I've already had my successful career. I want you all to grow and develop and get to the next level in your career. So a lot of mine is career development. And a lot of times people will say to me, "This is the first time I've had like a conversation like this." And I think that's something that's important, I think, for leaders today, especially during this pandemic. And it's, with no one-on-one ability live, you have to find ways to develop your people that are different than it was before this pandemic.
I want to get to your business career and what you're doing now. You go from being the first female CEO of Deloitte, which is one of the big 4 accounting firms, and the top professional services firm in the world. You go from doing that to being the commissioner of the NBA. What learnings did you gain in that role as the CEO of Deloitte that's really coming in handy now?
Well, first, everyone says, why would you go from that long business career to commissioner of the WNBA? And
well, I'm going to ask you that.
Okay, all right. And so I learned, there are so many lessons I learned at Deloitte. I learned about, I had this great front row seat into so many industries. David, I served the S&Ls during the S&L savings and loans during the S&L crisis of the late 80s. I served some tech companies during the dot-com bubble. Then there was Enron, and that threw the profession I was in a crisis, and we became regulated, and that certainly changed the profession forever. And then the financial crisis of 07 and 08. So, think about, all of those things, which I know you dealt with in your career too. And every time one of those things happened, I raised my hand and I said, I want to do something different. I want to take advantage of an opportunity. I want to help the firm thrive during this very difficult time. And so, when I came to the WNBA, I mean, this is a multi-dimensional transformation. I'm hoping ultimately to raise all of women's sports, not just the WNBA. But, and thank goodness that, I came in and I had that business background, because on day 4 of when I came in, they threw me in a meeting to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement because the players weren't happy and they had opted out of the prior collective bargaining agreement. And that was on day 4. So if I didn't know anybody. I walked into a room, and everyone thinks sports is so different, but sports is big business, and big business is about relationships. And 4 days in, I didn't get to build relationships. So I started to build relationships over that summer, knowing that once the season was over in October, we're a summer sport in the WNBA from May till October when we crown the champion. So we knew when we got to November, December, I knew, like, I'm really going to have to build some relationships here if we have any shot to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement that the players will be proud of, that we can afford, and that's progressive, and that, will set women's sports on a different, trajectory. Because I was hired by Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, to change the narrative around women's sports in the WNBA and to look at different revenue models. So I thank goodness I was so blessed to have the career at Deloitte that positioned me to come in and say, the first thing I did is, okay, what is our strategy? And they're looking at me kind of funny. And I said, well, we've got 3 pillars: player first, new revenue models, and fan experience, fan engagement. And I said, and I knew nothing about sports coming in other than I was a huge fan and I played, but nothing about the business of sports. And I said, those are our 3 pillars. So over the summer into the fall, that's what we did. And I also learned something really important at Deloitte, which was when I became the CEO, I actually met with a prominent female CEO, had been a CEO for a decade or two. And she had reached out to me. She said, I'd love to catch up with you. She was on the board of one of my clients. And she said, the first thing you need to do, Cathy, is you need to do some small things of symbolic value to build trust, because then the harder things you have to get done, like culture change, because I was telling her some of the things we had to get done and that had been kicked down the can had been kicked down the road, and I really need to get on this. She said, no, don't get on that right away. Small things of symbolic value. So we created these, what we called Bureaucracy Busters, and some things that were really aggravating our partners. And we had 3,000 partners who had 4,000 opinions. And so we created these things to make their life easier that were small. They were small little incremental things, but they said, oh, okay, Cathy gets us. And I built some trust there. And then when we had to get the harder things done and change the culture a bit, that was actually easier to get done because we had built that trust. So I learned that. So I come into the WNBA, I go into that meeting 4 days in, I'm like, the players don't trust us. So we did some small things of symbolic value through the fall of that year, the fall of 19. And then the players were like, oh, I actually saw one of them quoted, like, Cathy gets us. And, it was a very small thing I did, but, and that led to, again, a successful negotiation around collective bargaining, and then led to the pandemic hits, and now can we actually get a season done? And so again, those little small things came in handy.
Give us an example of one of those small things.
So, for instance, for the WNBA, they don't fly charter like the men's leagues do. Yet we had a playoff game where the 2 teams in the playoffs had to fly, west to east with virtually no days rest. They were going to have to take red eyes. They were going to have to play that night. And so I basically approved a charter flight for them. Doesn't sound like a huge thing, was a big deal to those players because they said, Cathy gets it. She's about our health and safety. This would have been a terrible. I did it because, one, like I said, the product on the court's not going to be good. These players are the best at their craft in the world, but they're going to work on virtually no sleep. And so I wanted a great product on the court, which they usually deliver, but I wasn't positive. And this was the semifinals of our playoff. So that was something little that I did.
That makes a lot of sense, and I can see why that builds trust, And when you were at Deloitte, I understand that over 97% of your team members gave you a positive rating in your employee survey. How do you become such a popular leader like you are and make the tough decisions? How do you manage that popularity and being, because you're a hard driving business person?
Yeah, David, it's a great question because there is a balance here because a lot of times you've got to make decisions that aren't popular. And especially when you have people who, are, looking to get to the next level and they're all looking to climb the ladder. But I think for me, I got in the role. I think at the time we had 68,000 professionals and we were growing. We ultimately grew to about a little over 100,000 when I was done my term. And I said, like we're about our reputation and we're about people. And every day, 68,000 or 100,000 people go to work with the Deloitte brand, and I have to run a people first agenda. So again, looking for some small things of symbolic value, like if you're 22 years, our average, and also the Deloitte's average at the time was like 26, 27 years old. So a very young workforce, millennial, now digital native workforce. And so I said, we've got to look at the life cycle of an employee. And actually, my head of talent put together one slide and he showed like if you're 22 years old, you're looking for a fitness subsidy or maybe student loan consolidation. When you're 32, maybe you're looking for parental leave. When you're 52, maybe you're more interested in the retirement benefits. So we put on one page the life cycle of an employee. So whether you were 22, 32, 52, or envisioning yourself still with the firm, as that it was all on one page and this is how you could look at what the a career at Deloitte was offering you. So I think it was part of that and communication, of course, recognition, making sure people felt recognized. Because when you're such a big firm, you've got to try to make it feel small, and that's hard to do when you're 100,000 strong. And it was impressive, but and again, it was never about me and one person. I had a great team around me. I had great leadership. I changed out some leadership when I came into the role, which, every leader says I should have done it sooner. And I agree with that. But, we got the right leaders and the right vision and our employees. I think, when we did our surveying, we did pulse surveys, our annual survey. And, I know what you were reading from with some external survey. So it's nice to have that recognition. But for me, it was all about a people first agenda, and every decision we made, let's go back, is it a people first decision?
What would be the toughest decision you made at Deloitte, and how did you do it? You got this great popularity, people trust you, but take us through a really tough decision you had, and how'd you leverage your popularity, or did you to make that decision?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. One was there was so much, and this is 5 years ago now, so much nascent technology and new technology and shiny new tools and technologies emerging: AI, social, mobile, blockchain, cloud, and if the future of work. So we're a big accounting and consulting firm. Our clients are doing digital transformations, and so probably one of the toughest decisions was to decide how to allocate our investment each year. And I'll never forget, it was 5 years ago or so, and nobody knew much about cloud. I mean, it was starting to emerge as a word, and we said, what is this? So I used to do these 90-minute sessions where our consultants would come in and give me a deep dive on these emerging technologies, and you couldn't invest in all of them. You just couldn't. While cognitive technologies were something that sounded sexy and great, cloud was one where we said, here we are, we serve like 90% of the Fortune 500. We've got this technology capability, strong technology capability already from doing ERP implementations and others. And then you had the cloud providers over here, of which there are only a few. And so we're kind of in the middle, and we thought this was something we really wanted to invest in. And then I was told, well, it's going to take $350 million over 3 years to go hire the right capability, the right engineers, cloud engineers. And I'm like, oh, okay, 350 million, even in a firm of our size and scale, was a lot of money. But I studied it, I got the right experts in, and we made that investment. And I was just talking to the person who led our consulting division at the time, and she and I were talking about how, it's driving multiple billions of business today, and how looking back, it was a big risk and a lot of money, it seemed at the time. But, ultimately you're proud of those type of difficult decisions you made, because we could have put it into AI. We could have put it into something else, because there were a lot of other companies that were going hard at, but we decided this was it. And, it was a hard decision to make, because it took money from other areas that partners wanted us also to invest in.
You go from Deloitte to the WNBA. So I'll ask you the question now: why in the world would you take on a job like this?
Well, after 33 years, I mean, I was definitely looking for something different. I had gotten this front seat in so many industries and seen so much. And I said, I had a friend, and he was a partner at Deloitte. He had left to go over to the NBA, and and I joked with him when he left, and I was the CEO, and he called me, and I was upset that he left because he was a friend, and he said he was becoming the vice president of whatever at the NBA. And I go, that sounds pretty cool, knowing my dad had been drafted in the 50s. So I said, I want to come work for you someday. Ha, ha, ha. So my term's coming to an end, about 6 months left. And he calls me and says, I have the perfect second act for you, Cathy, the WNBA commissioner. And I'm like, no, literally, I'm not kidding you. He called me once a month for the next 4 months and kept saying the same thing. And then finally he said, it was March and my term was ending June 1. And he said, Cathy, like 30 minutes, literally the NBA was 2 blocks away from where I worked in Manhattan in the 30 Rock. So it was 2 blocks away. He said, come over for 30 minutes and meet with Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, and Mark Tatum, who's the deputy commissioner. And just 30 minutes, that's all I ask. And so I did. And I kind of said, well, I did want something different. I wanted something with a broader women's leadership platform and something I had a passion for. Never think that would take me to sports. I actually thought I had served the life sciences pharmaceutical industry. I thought maybe I'd become a college president. I thought a non-for-profit leader. And this came up, and given my dad's connection and just, being from, a big family of sports fans, this seemed like and I knew it was a big transformation and it will continue to be. And I said, I'm going to take this role. And a lot of people who knew me well said this totally makes sense, because if you walked into my office, I used to have basketballs in the back of me, signed by Coach K and Allen Iverson, because I was a Sixers fan, and then but people who didn't know me were like, really, like, why don't you take another corporate job? But it totally met those three criteria I set forth for myself for my next role. And I never thought we'd run into a pandemic. I never thought there'd be a racial justice crisis in my first, full year. But, I couldn't be more happy with the decision to make an impact on, women's sports in the WNBA.
Outstanding. And you're actually, as I understand it, the first person to be named commissioner versus president of the WNBA. Was this something that you asked for? Did you say, Adam, I'm going to come into this job, and I want to be a commissioner. I want to have the same level as you have.
No, Adam called me after we had already talked a few times, and Adam said, by the way, I'm going to make you a commissioner. He said, major sports leagues have commissioners, and the WNBA is a major sports league, and you're going to be a commissioner. And I, of course, was like, Adam, I'm totally not into titles. You don't need to do this for me. I had already said yes, by the way, so I had no leverage at that point. But no, he was, really thoughtful about it. And my reaction to him was, Adam, this is, I think, given the societal conversation about women and equality, and this was a couple of years ago now, I said, I think this is really smart, but don't do it for me. And he said, nope, and it does. And he wanted a seat at the table for someone else to be called commissioner in his ecosystem, I think. And it was, it's a responsibility for sure, because I have gotten that seat at the table. I'll never forget my first week on the job. I was on a panel with Adam and the commissioner of MLS, Don Garber, and another commissioner. And I'm like, oh, this is what Adam meant. I'm going to be sitting here, weighing in on the evolution of women's sports and the impacts that women's sports are having. And that's essentially the seat I've gotten.
That's great. And Adam is a guy who is highly reputed for being a phenomenal leader, and he's done a great job with the NBA. What would be the top thing you think you've picked up from him?
Well, and I get to sit on the senior leadership team of the NBA, and that's been a great, especially through this crisis. And he's just, really, really thoughtful guy, cerebral, a great leader. He senses things really quickly. And so, I'm just kind of enjoying learning about the inner workings of, a major men's professional league and women's through his eyes and through his leadership, which is nice, because after you've been the CEO, I'll never forget my first day on the job at the WNBA. I said, Adam, I was a partner at Deloitte since 1998, and so I really haven't. Once you make partner, you don't really have a boss. And I said, so how is this going to work? And he said, Cathy, I'm a commissioner. You're a commissioner. I'm not your boss. If you need me, you need to run things by me. I'm empowering you. Go. I mean, he literally said, go. And I always appreciated that. And that's leadership right there, because he trusted me. He knew my background, and trusted that I could come transform this organization.
And I'm sure that trust is makes you not want to let him down too. And I think that's kind of how it works,
Absolutely.
And one of your as you mentioned, one of your first big challenges, and it ended up being a big accomplishment, is gaining this collective bargaining agreement, which solved a huge problem for the league. Tell us, I always like to get in the head of a leader. Tell us how you went about making this deal happen.
Gosh, I never thought, like someone said, oh, you're going to have to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement, but I had never dealt with a union workforce. I had worked on clients who had union workforces in the automobile industry and others, but I had never directly dealt with it. So, it's not like these women are all that replaceable. They're the best professional basketball players at their craft in the world. So that's what was a little unusual, and I sensed, because they opted out of the prior deal 2 years early, which they had the right to, I sensed there was a trust thing. So we just, again, went about that summer. I did a 12-city tour in each city. I met with everybody in the ecosystem, the fans, the players, the media, which is an interesting constituent that I really didn't have before, that I have now every day. The management of the teams, the GMs, the head coaches, the team presidents, the whole management of it all, arena personnel. So meeting with the players in each market, and in some ways I would speak to them in the locker room or at center court during their shoot around. And thank goodness I played the game, because I always started with that. And if they had some Notre Dame players, I'd say I played for Muffet McGraw. And you need a little cred, with these players. Because they're young. And when I came into the league, I said, like, what's the average tenure of a WNBA player? And they said 8 years. And I said, and they're all college graduates. They're super smart. And I said, okay, they're 30 on average. Now, what do they do for the next 30 years? So part of what I wanted to do too, and I talked to them about, is I want to help you with your post-playing career. Some of them want to be broadcasters and already are, like Candace Parker and Rebecca Lobo, who retired years ago. Some and Lisa Leslie and others. Some of them want to be social justice, change agents. Like Maya Moore had taken a year off when I first came into the league. And so that was part of it. So it was building that trust along the way. And then it was, and this is what I learned from Deloitte. I took the people first agenda over to the WNBA into a player first agenda. And now it's like, everything we're going to do, we're going to think about the players. These are working women. They're moms, they're entrepreneurs. Some of them have their own businesses. A lot of them have to go play overseas in the off season. And so how can we make their life easier? So it wasn't just about pay, even though we tripled the pay for the top players, but it was also about other benefits, mom benefits, fertility benefits, maternity leave, just being as progressive as we possibly could with, of course, the owners' commitment, because the owners pay the players. And the owners were all in. I couldn't be more thrilled. That was a constituent group, kind of having 12 different ownership groups that I had to start building relationships with quickly, because they were on the other side of the table. Technically, I was representing them on the other side of the table with the players. So we just chipped away at a lot of different things and tried to put a package together that the players would be proud of, because the one thing I knew we needed, the players had to be behind this. And we couldn't have them start playing with a chip on their shoulder that we didn't come all out with a holistic benefit package. And we did. And we bargained hard, and we were up a lot of nights in December into January. And then last January, finally came to terms and announced it together. I'll never forget, on Good Morning America, together with the players.
Yeah, that's great. I remember seeing that, by the way. And, I understand that the head of the players union, Terry Jackson, wanted to interview you before you actually got the job. I hope I have that right. And how'd you feel about that? And what'd you think about this, in terms of being interviewed by someone from the union before you get the job?
Again, it was all a whirlwind, because I was interviewing with a bunch of different constituents. I interviewed with, I think it was 3 owners who, of different WNBA teams. and Terry, who is the executive director of the union. And so, and I think it was important that Adam offer that to Terry, because I'm not sure it was always offered in the past, that there was transparency around a candidate, because they had gone without a commissioner from October, and I didn't start till July, and I was interviewing basically April, May. So they had gone quite a while with an interim president at the time, and so it was important, and especially knowing that we had a collective bargaining agreement. But I must say, when I left her office, I was kind of like, oh, this is going to be very interesting, because this is going to be a big deal when I start. And I also have to transform the revenue model and work on the fan experience and our digital platform. And yeah, and I have to build trust with Terry and the players. So Nneka Ogwumike is actually the president of the Players Association. She's a player, star player for the Los Angeles Sparks, and she was fabulous throughout. And she was really good to talk with and negotiate with, and the rest of the players. They have their own executive committee, so I learned a lot again about building relationships with the players. And Nneka went to Stanford. She's super smart, super impressive, and a great player too. So she was a big part of that negotiation as well.
Do you have any tricks up your sleeve in terms of how to really build relationships like that? Because you've mentioned the word relationships quite a few times.
Yeah, I think it's so important. This is David is one of the reasons I started playing golf, because I said I need to find a way in this, very male-dominated world to build relationships with business leaders. And so you have to find things either you have in common with the person you want to build a relationship with, or find the things that these small things that I've been talking about that are going to resonate with them, or like listening. I mean, if you ask me, the number one thing that I did in my first 9 months is I just listened. And I would give my vision, but I listened, and then I was really curious about why something was bothering a player, or why something was bothering a head coach or GM, and how could I actually come back and make change and impact. And I always had to balance that, because again, as you said, like sometimes some of the decisions you make don't make you popular. Like last summer in our bubble, I was not popular because I was really strict about adhering to all the health and safety protocols. And I was unpopular, but that was okay, because guess what? We got through a successful season, which was pretty existential for us. So, and so maybe one of the other things was, using my scenario planning kind of background from Deloitte, when we faced this crisis. I mean, that was such an important part of leading this league, because to be out of the sports landscape for 20 months, which is what it would have been existential for our league. And I'm not sure we would have recovered. And I think it would have impacted women's sports more broadly. And so, really to do, we only had like 30 to 60 days to do it and try to figure out whether we could put on a season. And again, so building those relationships with the players through the collective bargaining, and then, coming into this crisis, and then really listening to them and what their fears were, because they had a lot of fears about playing in the middle of a pandemic. And then when the George Floyd murder happened, they had a lot of fears about, we're a league, very diverse league of 80% women of color. So they had fears about the racial justice situation in the US, and basketball didn't seem so important to them anymore. So it was those relationships I built, and then kind of dealing with these crises, and letting the players see that I was listening to them, and I was curious about why things were impacting them that maybe I didn't see.
What a scenario you had to lead in. It's just been amazing, the confluence of all these things that have come together here. Yeah, and, at the same time, you mentioned you needed to transform the WNBA business model, the revenue model, which a lot of people would tell you it's in pretty tough shape. How do you see it?
Yeah, so when I came in, I said my first thing was, I see the problem. It's 3 words: marketing, marketing, marketing. And when I came in the league, someone threw a statistic at me that said, less than 4% of all media coverage of sports is women's sports. So wow, like, and then I asked, what's, being a CPA, like, what's the denominator? The denominator is huge because the men's sports numbers are huge. And then less 1% of all corporate sponsorship dollars go to women's sports. So I said, yeah, if we could just tick that up, a couple basis points, this would be a huge success. So this is what we're embarking on. So I took those 3 pillars, And I said, how do we drive new revenue models? We're standing up a special competition called Commissioner's Cup this year, a new asset that we can look for sponsors and media deals on. And it's really hard, but I will tell you the one thing I've learned, and thank goodness I had a specialization at Deloitte around derivative financial instruments and complex valuations. I spent, 4 years in that practice, and I'm thankful that I did, because now I'm like, telling people, can I see the valuation model for a patch on the uniform, a placement on the court, or the valuation of a WNBA franchise? Because I know it's flawed. I see that it's flawed. And there should be, some lessons here from all the work being done on the sustainability and all of that, it's not always quantitative measures. There's a lot of qualitative measures that should be put into a women's sports model. So it's not just the traditional eyes on the game kind of thing. So we're working very hard on transforming our digital platform, our fan engagement platform. So this is not easy. It's much harder than I actually imagined when I came in, but this is the challenge I took on. This is the challenge I'm going to finish. And this valuation model issue I see as the core, because we can do the greatest job at the WNBA, and we need to build more household names. We need to build rivalries. I mean, look at the NBA, David, 40 years in, their finals were on tape delay, and we're only embarking on our 25th season this year. So 40 years in, and you know what happened? A big rivalry got born out of college, and it was called Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. And everyone wanted to watch them, a rivalry, two great players. And then Michael Jordan comes along, and then Nike comes along with Michael Jordan, and that's the household global name. And then you had Kobe and Shaq, and now LeBron, Steph. So I've studied a lot of that. I've studied other sports. We're a diverse sport. We're very culturally relevant. And I think there's a lot of momentum around women's sports. I mean, there's data out there, and you ran a consumer business that, 80% of every consumer purchasing decision in a household is made by a woman, and we skew more women fans, we skew more diverse and younger fans. And also 84% of people surveyed said they like to watch women's sports, but where are they? Why aren't we pulling them in? And so, that's going to be a big part of the transformation of my job, to build household names, have some rivalries. We're entering our 25th season, the only professional women's sports league in the U.S. to reach 25 years. So I'm very proud of that. But we have to capitalize on the momentum. Our USAB women's national team in basketball is going for their 7th consecutive gold medal in Tokyo this summer, and nobody knows about it. Why is that? Why isn't NBC and others, really driving, because this would be called the greatest dynasty ever if this was the men's team going for their 7th consecutive gold medal, which will break a record. So, we're working on it. It is like pushing a big boulder up the hill, but we're making progress. And, and the level play on the court, the quality on the court is great. It's the ecosystem around it that needs.
No, the playing is unbelievable. I mean, the athleticism is amazing, and and you said it yourself. The marketing is so critical to growing the league. And how are you building your own skill and the marketing skill of the league? Or did you already have that skill?
I think it all comes from two things: sensing shifts and being curious. And so when, I, think about the shifts in the demographics, when I think about the shifts in data and digital and how do we get more people, and also my experience in a crisis. So last summer, we went from having 1.3 million fans in our seats to 0. And so how do you engage your fans when they're not with you? And so we developed this thing called a Tap to Cheer app within the WNBA app. And 140 million times someone went and tapped on it. Our fans went and tapped on it. And I'm like, this is a WNBA. We don't get anything 140 million times. So there's something there when in the middle of a crisis, I was telling my team, like, this is the time to innovate. This is the decisions you make now are the decisions that are going to either sink you after the crisis is over or elevate you. And that was one that would elevate us. And we were just really piloting it. But it became a competition between teams. And in one game, Seattle versus Vegas, we had 4 million taps. So, and look, this is all because the players have such great play on the court. We have great avid fans, but we need more. We need more eyes on the game. Again, so thankfully, again, I was blessed to have this long career where I could bring that kind of lens that had never been brought, to the WNBA before.
Well, you're a natural marketer for sure. There's no question about that. I mean, because you understand how important your fans really are.
It was funny. About 4 months into the job, a media headline was "Marketer Cathy Engelbert." I'm like, oh no, no, no.
See,
I was a
uh,
finance person, but I do love the sensing shifts,
yeah,
and I think that's what marketing's all about.
great. Obviously, the movement towards diversity is really taking hold. How is this helping the league?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened last summer with how our players, first of all, I didn't know this when I came into the league, but the WNBA players have always had strong social justice platforms. But it really was apparent this year. So, this past year. So when they stepped up after the George Floyd murder and then the Jacob Blake situation, and a few players opted out to focus on their social justice platforms and really move the needle, and they're actually impactful, making change in their communities. So, and then we kind of got thrown into the middle of a political, campaign, and the players stood for their values, and I'm so proud of them around that. So, as we think about, like, not many people knew much about the WNBA, and I think last summer now millions know at least what they stand for. And again, they're working professional women, just like the working women at Deloitte or at and they want to be role models. They want to be viewed as leading in their communities, and they just are so significant to the conversation today. And so they're definitely being sought out. I hope that brands see the value of these diverse players and continue to step up and sponsor them. We are seeing certainly an uptick in that area, but we need more sponsors, more media deals, more evaluation that favors, again, some of this diversity, equity, and inclusion, as you know, is qualitative. It's not all quantitative, so you can't stick it in an algorithm and spit out a value that says now a franchise is valued X more, or a patch on the uniforms valued. So we're working on that, but I think the role models that these players have become will elevate them in kind of the conversation around sports.
You mentioned the political landscape, and I know Kelly Loeffler. She's the former senator of Georgia. She was the owner of the Atlanta Dream, and she was highly critical of the league's support for the Black Lives Matter, and she recently sold her interest in the team. How did you handle that criticism? And what stance did you take?
Well, look, first, I understand a little bit about politics from my prior life where, we had a whole kind of government relations, and I've, sat on boards where I see, the government relations. So I understand politics. I understand what was going on here. I'm so proud of the players of how they reacted. They kept their poise. They stuck with their values. I did counsel with them, don't just go against somebody. Look at who you're going to advocate for, what elected leaders share your values, and go advocate for that. So I think the players did that. They advocated generally for voting, as well, and so especially in their community, black and brown communities, they hugely advocated, and some volunteered at polling places, voting places, et cetera. So look, it was difficult to be thrown in the middle of that, but I understand politics. I think, help the players strategize around that because they don't have a lot of experience with this, but, was really proud of them sticking with their values and kind of shaping, I think, ultimately, what they wanted to be known for, which was advocating for elected leaders who shared their values.
That's interesting. And the league is very proactive in supporting the LGBTQ community. There's a lot of controversy. You're in the middle of a lot of controversy, Cathy, as I was studying what your job's all about. There's a lot of controversy about transgenders competing. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I would just say, obviously, it's something I consult with Adam about. And, obviously, there's some legislation recently, but, we've been known as one of the most inclusive leagues in sports. So we'll continue because of our diversity, whether it's our women of color or our LGBTQ plus community or the trans community. Like, this is who we are. We're extremely inclusive. And when we have to deal with one-offs, we'll deal with one-offs around the emerging both political and legislative landscape around that. But right now, we're hugely supportive of our players who, whether they're LGBTQ plus or not, what they stand for, what their values are. We've just always been known as such an inclusive league. And the players have taught me a lot about this. I mean, I thought like at Deloitte, we were one of the most inclusive organizations. I mean, these players are really passionate about being these role models in their communities again for tolerance and inclusivity and equity, and so they fight for that every day. They carry, I think, a heavy burden around all of this because, as you said, there's always controversy around it. So we'll take fact patterns one by one as these legislations roll out. Like today, we don't have fact patterns. We just our answer is we're an inclusive league, and we'll look at fact patterns one on one.
You know, it's so important for a leader to set an agenda. And you said you came in and you had three pillars. And how'd you go about coming up with that agenda so quickly? I mean, it seems to be so right on. It seems like you walked in, these are the three things we're going to focus on. Did you do any homework, or how did you go about doing that?
I must admit, not really, but as I embarked on this listening tour with the 12 markets, so I immediately, like I actually went to 2 markets before I even started. I said, let me go to WNBA games. They know I'm, been announced, but I had to finish my term at Deloitte. So I'm like, I had a month or so to learn a little bit. And I just said I knew that, they didn't have a permanent president for a while and now commissioner. And so I knew I was going to have to come in, and I attended a bunch of meetings before I technically started, way more than I thought I was going to have to attend. But I wanted that. I wanted to be curious because I didn't know anything about the inner workings of a sports league, of the WNBA. So I'm thankful. So that when I came in, the first thing I did is, like as a good consultant, like put together the 3 pillars and literally started to communicate because also the people under me, now I went from a firm of 100,000 to a league of 144 players. So you may think, oh, it's so much smaller, but the impact of these players was so much wider and bigger, especially in diverse communities. So it had to be right. It had to be player first. But I got hired also to drive new revenue and a different economic model, as well as make the fan experience and fan engagement better. So I mean, it was pretty simple when you look at it, especially when you've observed sports leagues for your whole life, which I have. It was pretty clear to me it had to be simple, it had to be there had to be plans under it that are executable, and it had to be transformative. And the one thing I've learned from a lot of CEOs like yourself, like the bold will win, everything must change, and that's what I've been challenging my team about.
Yeah, this is an Olympic year, and the WNBA, I don't know if everybody knows this, actually takes off time to compete. And, I'm not sure if I was an owner, Cathy, I'd really like that too much. I mean, my players are going to go off and play somewhere else, and I can't make money. How do the owners feel about that?
Yeah, I think obviously our owners are super supportive, knowing every 4 years, especially the USAB team that's going for their 7th consecutive gold medal. But we also are becoming more of a global game, like the NBA has done such a great job bringing in global players. So we'll have, not in addition to the 12 US players, we'll also probably have 12 to 15 to 20 other players playing for their countries, Australia and China and Germany and Belgium, et cetera. So it will be interesting. This will be my first time having to take a break. And so we'll break by the middle of July. But the nice thing is we'll probably have a kind of an all-star game as a lead-in and to an Olympic send-off. And then we have great plans to restart the season with the final of our Commissioner's Cup. So we're going to try to use it to our advantage. But, the owners, obviously know it exists every 4 years. And obviously it was supposed to happen last year. But, we're going into our 25th anniversary season. I think we have some neat things planned around that and the Olympic send-off. And then, we'll support, our USAB, organization, which, we do a lot with, and, for the good of the game. And also, 3-on-3 basketball is an Olympic sport this year. So we'll also have WNBA players competing in what they call 3x3 for the first time in the Olympics. So that's exciting because that's the #1 urban sport in the world. And it's kind of like, beach volleyball, which is outdoors and fun, and they play music. That's kind of what 3v3 is. It's kind of a funner version of the sport, but, serious because our team's going to be going for the gold there too.
That's funny. When I was running marketing at Pizza Hut, we sponsored the national 3-on-3 basketball tournament. It was like unbelievable. I remember I actually played with Roger Staubach in one of the events.
Oh,
It was
wow.
great. I wasn't nearly as good as you, but
A celebrity
now
game.
Cathy, yeah, the late Kobe Bryant was passionate about women's basketball, and I understand that he met with you. Tell us about your discussion with Kobe and how it impacted you.
Yeah, it was so interesting. So I'm like 2 months into the job, and Adam Silver's over in China, and Kobe's there. And Adam says, I get this message like, Cathy, Kobe Bryant wants to meet with you. And I'm like, I'm 2 months in the job. Kobe Bryant wants to meet with me. And I'm from Philadelphia. Kobe was from Philadelphia. So I'm like, this is pretty cool. Um, and um, and so Adam said, yeah, he came to China and he didn't want to talk to me about the NBA. He wanted to talk about the WNBA and wanted to meet the new commissioner. So literally, probably a week after that, Kobe was in my office in New York, and he came in. It was as if we knew. I never met him before, didn't know him, admired his play, certainly for the Lakers, and so was just as if we knew each other. We were supposed to spend, I think, 45 minutes. I gave him an orange hoodie, which is our signature, WNBA logo. And he literally, we talked, I think, for 2.5 hours and about his passion for the sport, his daughter, Gigi. This was in, I think, October of 2019, before the awful tragedy in January of 20. But and he was a real advocate. What do you need, Cathy? I gave him the vision. I talked about the 3 pillars. I told him the transformation we had ahead of us. We did need funding and money. And so he's like, what do you need? What do you need? I want to help. And I didn't know a lot about how great Gigi was, and she certainly would have been a star WNBA player, I believe. So unfortunately, a horrible tragedy. He was a huge advocate. We've actually started the Kobe and Gigi Bryant Advocacy Award for the WNBA, which we'll award at some point this year, to honor that legacy and to have others step into his shoes as an advocate, because he was really personally, I only met him the one time, but, for instance, right after the collective bargaining agreement was signed on January 15th, who was one of the first people to text me with a thumbs up? Kobe Bryant.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, so unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, the horrible accident happened in the helicopter. But again, I think from the perspective of his mentorship of our players, I think his legacy lives on definitely in those players.
Cathy, tell us about your fan base. I would imagine there's a big father-daughter crowd. I know my grandkids. I have two granddaughters. They love basketball. They're really into it, and they go with their dad. Is that a big part of your fan base?
Yeah, so we definitely dads with daughters. We have a skewed older fan base who tend to follow the college game. And the college game, the NCAA women's game, has grown enormously in the last decade. So I'm a big numbers person, data. I said, give me the data for the college game. How can we integrate more these stars when they come to the WNBA, so that we integrate that fan base over? And we also, again, have a young, diverse fan base. And so, it's funny when you look at the NBA and the NHL and MLB, everyone tries to compare us to them, but we have a very different fan base. And so I think, again, we're looking at the cultural, shifts as we think about other competitions we could put on, other types of things to grow our revenue, lifestyle type things where, our women and women of color are so popular in their communities. So, but we just need more fans. So I love our fan base. They're, so avid. You go to Minnesota, it's an amazing, like the Lynx have been so successful, amazing fan base there. Connecticut, the center of women's basketball, certainly at the college level, but our Connecticut Sun team has an amazing fan base out at Mohegan Sun. Vegas has built just in 2 years an amazing fan base, and NFL owner Mark, Davis just bought the team from MGM. So that's fun, and to leverage the Raiders platform, there is going to be really great to see how we can drive a new fan base out in Las Vegas. So again, and that's one thing we're working on our digital platform as well, so we can get more data on our fans. Like, so if someone goes to the WNBA store, the NBA store, or Fanatics and buys an orange hoodie, who are they? Why are they interested in the WNBA? I was actually in a sushi restaurant the other day in New Jersey now that we're open back up. And someone walked in with the orange hoodie on. And so I said to the colleague I was with, like, go ask them why they have that WNBA hoodie on. And he said, I'm a big fan. I love the WNBA. And then she's like, well, the commissioner's right over there. So I chatted with them for a while. But, so it's catching on, but it's about marketing and bringing a new fan base, a young fan, a diverse fan base. We call it the architects of next. Let's try to bring the architects of next, the next generation into the game. So that's what we're working hard on.
There's so much learning in that little vignette. The fact that Cathy saw that orange hoodie and wanted to know why. I love it when people want to learn about their customers. And Cathy, you're a great speaker, and I really enjoyed watching the speech you gave to the Duke School of Business. And you talked about how the biggest stuff happens in life's smallest moments. Could you explain that?
Yeah. As you look back over your career, David, I look back over my career. I mean, it really was the small moments that like made you who you are, both as a leader and ultimately the breaks that you got in your career. So just a quick story. I had many turning points in my career, but one I credit a lot with was, I happened to be pregnant with my second child, but I hadn't told many people yet. And the firm came to me and said, oh, we want you to move to this Midwest city. And it was going to be to serve a large client. I was a young partner, so I was so blessed and honored. But I knew there was a large client in the industry I was serving at the time, which was pharmaceuticals. And this client was literally 2 miles from my house, no stop signs. And I could envision running home to feed the baby and then heading back to work seamlessly. So I consulted with a mentor who said, Cathy, you could say no to the opportunity in the Midwest, but like try to solve another problem. This leader came to you with a problem. He's got to find somebody to fill this position. So try to solve another problem he has. Come with a solution. So I knew they were looking for someone to fill this lead partner role in that New Jersey company. So I said, like, instead of that, and I was nervous, instead of that client in the Midwest, how about this client in New Jersey? And Davey, you know what that leader said to me? Oh, we never would have thought of you for that. And I'm saying inside, that is all I'm thinking of for me. So the lesson there was, a small moment, but nobody's thinking about your career as much as you are. And I had said no to the one opportunity, opened the huge door for the other. And, the small moment was like, had I gone to the Midwest, I probably would have never been then positioned to be the CEO of Deloitte. And so like sometimes when you say no, you're taking a risk, but if you follow it with what I call a yes, your path goes somewhere else. So there's a lot of small things like that throughout my career, that shaped ultimately how I got to where I got to. But, I was just blessed to make those decisions and constantly raise my hand to do something different. And that it was those small moments that led to a big moment ultimately to be appointed the CEO.
That's a great insight. And it's been so much fun talking to you, Cathy. And, I want to have a little bit more with the lightning round of Q&A for you.
Great.
Are you ready for this? Okay.
I'm ready.
All right. The 3 words that best describe you.
Oh, so competitive.
I knew that was going to be number 1. I knew it was number 1. All right.
Can you tell? That's number 1. But also, focus, definitely. And I'd say courageous.
If you could be one person for a day besides yourself, who would it be and why?
One person. Probably the leader I admire most is Abraham Lincoln, because his entire cabinet was against him. And he had so much failure. I think he ran 4 times for Congress and the Senate and lost. And he was a risk taker and he failed a lot. His business failed. And so I really always admired him. And I would like to put myself back in that time when his entire cabinet was against what he was doing. And he had the courage to do what he thought was right.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Well, personally, my kids would say it's dirty dishes in the sink. But in business, it's definitely complaining about problems without solutions.
What's something about you that few people would know?
I can juggle. So I can juggle 3 basketballs, eggs, anything. I'm a juggler.
That's great. What's the coolest thing about being the commissioner of the WNBA?
My heart gets so warm when, I attended, I think 39 straight games last year in our bubble, and just seeing these players thrive is definitely the coolest thing. Like we did so much planning and scenario planning leading up and trying to keep them healthy and safe. And when they got on the court for that first game, it was just so warming, and that was so cool to see that level of play and how great those players are.
Now, what would be your kids? What do they think is the coolest thing about you being the commissioner of the WNBA? Is it the orange hoodie?
Yeah, well, I have to say that, I think my daughter always thought I was cool being the CEO of Deloitte, but my son didn't. My son's 19, my daughter's 23 now. But when I became the commissioner of the WNBA, my son was playing high school baseball. And the day I was announced, I actually was able to get to the game. So I go to the game and, my son comes up to me and says, Mom, he was the captain for the game. It was his senior year. So he went up to the umpires with the head coach and they introduced each other. And the head coach goes, his mom was just announced as the commissioner of the WNBA. And the umpires were like, that's the coolest thing we ever heard. So I think my son thought I was cool from that day on. But yeah, they really
good,
like it. Although my son's so funny, like the one thing I didn't want in my second act was a big, like public facing media job. And he's like, Mom, this is going to be more media. And I said, no, it's a small women's league. No. This is a big public facing media job, which, is not what I wanted. But, obviously I deal with that.
You've got the 2021 season coming up. What are you most excited about?
Yeah, 25th season. We had a very active free agency period, which the collective bargaining agreement allowed for much more active free agency. We had some blockbuster moves, including Candace Parker to Chicago. But again, on the way to, building household names and rivalries. So I'm excited, to get this tipped off, hopefully, with the right health and safety protocols.
You're such an accomplished woman, and you've talked about competing in a male-dominated world. What would be the number one advice you'd give to aspiring female leaders?
Yeah, definitely raise your hand and build your capabilities because, no one's thinking about your career as much as you are. And I mean, I have to say that time and time again, if I hadn't raised my hand, I went to our national office and did research. If I didn't raise my hand and do something different when I went to our capital markets group, and you have to raise your hand and you can't fear failure. You can't, I think it was Wayne Gretzky that said, you really miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I do think fear of failure is one of the biggest, factors that stop you from being successful. So that's my best advice.
I got to ask you this one. Would you want to become the first female commissioner of the NBA?
No, not in the plan. I mean, I've got a lot of work to do on the.
You got to be on the backup chart. I got to tell you that. So what would be the unfinished business for Cathy Engelbert?
Yeah, I mean, I want to continue to make an impact in the lives of particularly young women who I think lack a lot of confidence in raising their hand. The advice I give: raise your hand and build your capabilities, but they lack the confidence. And one quick story. When I became the CEO of Deloitte, here I am being hailed as the first female CEO of a Big Four accounting and consulting firm. And so I have an opening on my executive team, and 9 men come in, knock on my door, and ask for the job, and no women. And here I'm saying, geez, I'm a woman, and I thought I would change that, but it doesn't happen because women don't usually raise their hand. And so really important to me to continue with a women's leadership platform and work with advancing women and now diverse women in kind of the business world. So I'm looking forward to, we just announced Renee Montgomery to become a part owner in the Atlanta Dream. She is a player who just retired. She's fabulous, and I look forward to seeing her success in her post-playing career, helping run that team and business, and I hope to replicate that, at least in the short term, for other WNBA players.
Well, Cathy, I can't thank you enough for raising your hand and being on this podcast. It's been just an absolute delight hearing your thoughts on where you're taking the WNBA and your thoughts on leadership. And I really congratulate you on the success you've had so far and know that the best is yet to come.
Thank you, David. Thanks for all you're doing. My daughter, 23 years old, when I told her I was doing this, she goes, I listened to David Novak's podcast. So especially when we were in quarantine. So, thanks for what you're doing. You're making a big impact, I think, on the next generation as well.
Great. Thank you so much.